And now, a passage from Rise of the New West by Frederick Jackson Turner from Chapter 4, The South, 1820 to 1830. In the decade which forms the subject of this volume, no section underwent more far-reaching changes than did the group of South Atlantic states, made up of Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, with which this chapter will deal under the name of the South. Then it was that the South came to appreciate the effect of the westward spread of the cotton plant upon slavery and politics. The invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney in 1793 made possible the profitable cultivation of the short staple variety of cotton. Before this, the labor of taking the seeds by hand from this variety, the only one suited to production in the uplands, had prevented its use. Thereafter, it was only a question of time when the cotton area, no longer limited to the Tidewater region, would extend to the interior, carrying slavery with it. This invention came at an opportune time. Already the inventions of Arkwright, Hargreaves, and Cartwright had worked a revolution in the textile industries of England by means of the spinning jenny, the power loom, and the factory system, furnishing machinery for the manufacture of cotton beyond the world's supply. Under the stimulus of this demand for cotton, year by year the area of slavery extended towards the west. In the 20s, some of the southern counties of Virginia were attempting its cultivation. Interior counties of North Carolina were combining cotton raising with their old industries. In South Carolina, the area of cotton and slavery had extended up the rivers well beyond the middle of the state. While in Georgia, the cotton planters, so long restrained by the Indian line, broke through the barriers and spread over the newly ceded lands. The accompanying table shows the progress of this crop. It is evident from the figures that Tidewater, South Carolina, and Georgia produced practically all of the cotton crop in 1791, when the total was but 2 million pounds. By 1821, the Old South produced 117 million pounds, and 5 years later, 180 millions. But how rapidly in these 5 years the recently settled Southwest was overtaking the older section is shown by its total of over 150 millions. By 1834, the Southwest had distanced the older section. What had occurred was a repeated westward movement. The cotton plant first spread from the seacoast to the uplands and then, by the beginning of our period, advanced to the Gulf Plains until that region achieved supremacy in its production. How deeply the section was interested in this crop and how influential it was in the commerce of the United States appears from the fact that in 1820, the domestic exports of South Carolina and Georgia amounted to $15,215,000, while the value of the whole domestic exports for all the rest of the United States was $36,468,000. This, however, inadequately represents the value of the exports from these two cotton states because a large fraction of the cotton was carried by the coastwise trade to northern ports and appeared in their shipments. Senator William Smith of South Carolina estimated that in 1818, the real exports of South Carolina and Georgia amounted to more than half as much as that of the other states of the Union, including the vast unfertile valley of the Mississippi. The average annual amount of the exports of cotton, tobacco, and rice from the United States between 1821 and 1830 was about $33 million, while all other domestic exports made a sum of but $20 million. Even greater than New England's interest in the carrying trade was the interest of the South in the exchange of her great staples in the markets of Europe. Never in history, perhaps, was an economic force more influential upon the life of a people. As the production of cotton increased, the price fell, and the seaboard South, feeling the competition of the virgin soils of the Southwest, saw in the protective tariff for the development of northern manufactures the real source of her distress. The price of cotton was in these years a barometer of Southern prosperity and of Southern discontent. Even more important than the effect of cotton production upon the prosperity of the South was its effect upon her social system. This economic transformation resuscitated slavery from a moribund condition to a vigorous and aggressive life. Slowly, Virginia and North Carolina came to realize that the burden and expense of slavery as the labor system for their outworn tobacco and cornfields was partly counteracted by the demand for their surplus Negroes in the cotton fields of their more southern neighbors. When the lower South accepted the system as the basis of its prosperity and its society, the tendency in the states of the Upper South, except in the Pine Barrens and the Hill Country, to look upon the institution as a heritage to be reluctantly and apologetically accepted grew fainter. The efforts to find some mode of removing the Negro from their midst gradually came to an end, and they adjusted themselves to slavery as a permanent system. Meanwhile, South Carolina and Georgia found in the institution the source of their economic well-being and hotly challenged the right of other sections to speak ill of it or meddle with it in any way, lest their domestic security be endangered. When the South became fully conscious that slavery set the section apart from the rest of the nation, when it saw in nationalizing legislation such as protection to manufacturers and the construction of a system of internal improvements, the efforts of other sections to deprive the cotton states of their profits for the benefit of an industrial development in which they did not share, deep discontent prevailed. With but slight intermission from the days of Washington to those of Monroe, the tobacco planters under the Virginia dynasty had ruled the nation. But now, when the center of power within the section passed from the weakening hands of Virginia to those of South Carolina, the aggressive leader of the Cotton Kingdom, the South found itself a minority section in the Union. When it realized this, it denied the right of the majority to rule and proceeded to elaborate a system of minority rights as a protection against the forces of national development, believing that these forces threatened the foundations of the prosperity and even the social safety of the South. From the middle of the 18th century, the seaboard planters had been learning the lesson of control by a fraction of the population. The South was by no means a unified region in its physiography. The Blue Ridge cut off the low country of Virginia from the Shenandoah Valley, and beyond this valley, the Alleghanies separated the rest of the state from those counties which we now know as West Virginia. By the time of the Revolution in the Carolinas and Georgia, a belt of pine barrens skirting the fall line from 50 to 100 miles from the coast divided the region of tidewater planters of these states from the small farmers of the upcountry. This population of the interior had entered the region in the course of the second half of the 18th century. Scotch-Irishmen and Germans passed down the Great Valley from Pennsylvania into Virginia and through the gaps in the Blue Ridge out to the Piedmont region of the Carolinas, while contemporaneously other streams from Charleston advanced to meet them. Thus, at the close of the 18th century, the South was divided into two areas presenting contrasted types of civilization. On the one side were the planters, raising their staple crops of tobacco, rice, and indigo, together with some cultivation of the cereals. To this region belonged the slaves. On the other side was this area of small farmers raising livestock, wheat, and corn under the same conditions of pioneer farming as characterized the interior of Pennsylvania. From the second half of the 18th century down to the time with which this volume deals, there was a persistent struggle between the planters of the coast, who controlled the wealth of the region, and the free farmers of the interior of Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. The tidewater counties retained the political power which they already possessed before this tide of settlement flowed into the backcountry. Refusing in most of these states to reapportion on the basis of numbers, they protected their slaves and their wealth against the dangers of a democracy interested in internal improvements and capable of imposing a tax upon slave property in order to promote their ends. In Virginia, in 1825, for example, the Western men complained that 20 counties in the upper country with over 220,000 free white inhabitants had no more weight in the government than 20 counties on Tidewater containing only about 50,000, that the 6 smallest counties in the state compared with the 6 largest enjoyed nearly 10 times as much political power. To the gentlemen planters of the seaboard, the idea of falling under the control of the farmers of the interior of the South seemed intolerable. It was only as slavery spread into the uplands with the cultivation of cotton that the lowlands began to concede and to permit an increased power in the legislatures to the sections most nearly assimilated to the seaboard type. South Carolina achieved this end in 1808 by the plan of giving to the seaboard the control of one house, while the interior held the other. But it is to be noted that this concession was not made until slavery had pushed so far up the river courses that the reapportionment preserved the control in the hands of slaveholding counties. A similar course was followed by Virginia in the Convention of 1829 to 1830, when after a long struggle, a compromise was adopted, by which the balance of power in the state legislature was transferred to the counties of the Piedmont and the Valley. Here, slaveholding had progressed so far that the interest of those counties was affiliated rather with the coast than with the Trans-Allegheny country. West Virginia remained a discontented area until her independent statehood in the days of the Civil War. These transmontane counties of Virginia were, in their political activity during our period, rather to be reckoned with the West than with the South. Thus, the southern seaboard experienced the need of protecting the interests of its slaveholding planters against the free democracy of the interior of the South itself, and learned how to safeguard the minority. This experience was now to serve the South, when, having attained unity by the spread of slavery into the interior, it found itself as a section in the same relation to the union which the slaveholding Tidewater area had held towards the more populous upcountry of the South. The unification of the section is one of the most important features of the period. Not only had the South been divided into opposing areas, as we have seen, but even its population was far from homogeneous. By the period of this volume, however, English, French Huguenots, Scotch-Irish, and Germans had become assimilated into one people, and the Negroes, who in 1830 in the South Atlantic states numbered over 1.5 million in a white population of not much over 2 million, were diffusing themselves throughout the area of the section except in West Virginia and the mountains. Contemporaneously, the pioneer farming type of the interior of the section was replaced by the planter type. As cotton planting and slaveholding advanced into the interior counties of the old southern states, the free farmers were obliged either to change to the plantation economy and buy slaves, or to sell their lands and migrate. Large numbers of them, particularly in the Carolinas, were Quakers or Baptists, whose religious scruples combined with their agricultural habits to make this change obnoxious. This upland country, too distant from the seashore to permit a satisfactory market, was a hive from which pioneers earlier passed into Kentucky and Tennessee, until those states had become populous commonwealths. Now, the exodus was increased by this later colonization. The Ohio was crossed, the Missouri ascended, and the streams that flowed to the Gulf were followed by movers away from the regions that were undergoing the social and economic reconstruction.